Morning and welcome to the NWR Investor Conference. I'm Elliot. I will be your host for the next segment. We're going to take you through some great small caps and mid caps in the space, find out what they're doing, and give you the chance, of course, to ask questions of their CEOs as well. I'm about to hand over to Andreas Forrest from 4DMedical, but before I do, I'll just sort of give you a brief update on the company and what they're doing. Now, 4DMedical is a medical technology company that's aimed at delivering, I guess, the gold standard in respiratory diagnostics for all lung disorders, including asthma, cystic fibrosis, cancer, and of course, the name that we've all talked about for the year, COVID. The unique technology helps to accurately and quickly scan lung function as the patient breathes, which helps bring early diagnosis, and it's also able to monitor changes over time. The company recently received a federal government grant of over 29 million that will help it develop its own scanner technology. Now, don't forget, you can ask a question at any time. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. So you can ask questions to Andreas. When we finish, we will have a Q&A session. So make sure you get those in. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Andreas Forrest from 4DMedical.
Cheers, Elliot. Thank you. I will take this as read. So I think many of you on the call today are familiar with the 4DMedical story and with my story and my journey in it. So I'll just briefly lay out that, this has been a 15-year journey for me and for this technology, and that over that 15 years, that 15-year period, we've been able to, identify the $31 billion market opportunity, and then really take our technology through from an idea on a whiteboard, through the various stages of development and validation. And, key ones being taking the technology to laboratory, and then to preclinical studies, then to human studies, clinical trials, and then most recently FDA and a TGA clearance. So really been through that journey, taking the technology through those steps of validation has been really very validating for all of us. Also, as I said, we've got a really very good handle on the market opportunity, and we know that globally, there are well over 300 million lung diagnostic procedures, and that on an economic basis, the United States represents about 45% of that opportunity. Although, of course, Australia is also a very important market for us for a number of reasons, as well as, of course, the $400 million opportunity, the Australian $400 million opportunity here in Australia. And the opportunity that we're attacking is created by this gap, and that the current technologies that are servicing the need are not fit for purpose, and that between them, spirometry invented in the 1840s, X-ray in the 1890s, and CT in the 1970s, between them leave a substantial gap whereby the technologies are not fit for purpose. And here we have our slide showing that what it is that primarily that we're measuring. That we're measuring ventilation, we're measuring airflow in the lungs. And of course, that means where there's not airflow, it shows up really very clearly. And we can see that here in our lung defect that's really clearly visible, a whole part of the lower lung here where very little ventilation is getting during any phase of the breath. Additionally, we can see up in the top of that diseased lung, that subtle defect, where during some parts of the breath, it's not visible that there is a ventilation defect or that air is not reaching the top of that lung, but in other phases of the breath, it can. And so that means that a four-dimensional technique would be the only type of technique that could detect that type of condition. And to the best of our knowledge, only 4DMedical to detect subtle defects such as the one shown there. And similarly, we can see compensation happening in the other part of the lung, which is, of course, part of the reason why pulmonary function testing is problematic. And additionally, that of course, as you know, that we provide this as a software as a service by leveraging existing X-ray equipment that's already that's already across every major hospital in Australia, the United States, and in fact, the whole world. So, you know, we get to this exciting point where the three products which currently occupy 98% of the market, you know, each have their share of that market because of their niche advantages. You know, that spirometry has its share because it measures airflow. Well, of course, as you saw, XV measures airflow, but not only just in 1D like spirometry does, but in 4 dimensions. As we've discussed, that you know, X-ray has its share of the market because it's low cost and it's very safe. But as we discuss it, you know, our technology uses existing X-ray equipment to do the imaging, so we have those capabilities embedded in our product. And that CT has its share of the market because it's high cost. Because it's high resolution and highly detailed. But XV delivers something which is not just a 3-dimensional image, but in fact a 4-dimensional measurement of airflow without the high cost and without the high dose that CT have. So we have the advantages of each of these modalities in one single platform, while also leaving their disadvantages behind. You know, which really allows us to go to hospitals with a really incredibly compelling and in fact almost unique value proposition for the healthcare sector, for a hospital customer. You know, typically when pitching a healthcare product to a hospital, you really have basically, you're sitting somewhere on that value, that cost value curve, right? And so, you know, typically that is that, for example, you have a generic technology which is low in cost, but similar in healthcare value to the premium product that it's competing with. Or perhaps, you know, you're selling a premium product which may be substantially, you know, maybe you know, substantially or even just a little bit better than the products it's competing with, but is dramatically more expensive. We have a unique opportunity pitching to hospitals that we have a product which provides improved patient outcomes for reduced care, and then has the added twin benefits of improving patient experience as well as being really simple and easy to implement at a site. So really fantastic, compelling, unique value proposition that we can hit all of those points at once instead of having to lay off one against the other. And you don't just have to take our word for it. You know, we're incredibly proud of you know, couldn't be more honored to have the support of fantastic doctors and you know, from around Australia and in fact around the world. So we've had while this has been a 15-year journey for the technology and a 7.5-year journey for 4D Medical, we've had an incredibly busy, you know, 18 to 24 months. So flowing through from just, you know, the last year or so, you know, having that final tick of approval from the FDA, that not just that we're cleared, but that we're cleared for all indications of the lung. Of course, the IPO in August, TGA in Australia. You know, also news that I think some folks have missed about us is that AusIndustry approved an advanced finding for us to receive R&D tax credits for our eligible overseas expenditure. So that's effectively going to reduce our US clinical trial costs by 43.5%. So really very substantial economic news for the business. Secured a partnership with the University of Miami, and in fact, calling you from Melbourne today. I'm very excited to be in Australia at the moment. But when I received that good news that I'll be talking about in a little bit, I was in Miami at the University of Miami right now with those guys, and the level of excitement and engagement there is really off the charts. They are moving very rapidly and very purposefully towards including XV technology across a substantial number of avenues of both their research and their day-to-day clinical practice. And that's really, they are, of course, the two tracks of our core of our core strategy over the next 12 months is to lay down both evidence in terms of scientific evidence in research, but also day-to-day clinical practice evidence through pilot programs, and to have both of those happening side by side in Miami, and the pace and level of engagement is really incredibly exciting. Also, we're able to kick off 2 pilot programs, both in Australia and the United States, with our first commercial use based in Australia, which is, opens that door, or is that the beginning of those Australian-based pilot programs, as well as securing our first clinical pilot in the United States at St. Joseph's, which is incredibly exciting site. The site there is part of the 51 hospital Providence chain, or IDN. So really very significant long-term opportunity. That comes with some downside, which is that the pilot is moving a little slower than a lot of folks would have wished, because a number of things are having to go up to the network level. But additionally, it's also really worth pointing out that the impact of COVID is really, I think, very difficult for folks who have been in Australia and not been to the United States to understand. 500,000 folks in Americans have lost their lives. It's an absolute tragedy of a really very substantial scale. More Americans were killed by COVID last year than during World War II across all the years of World War II. So really very significant impact. However, the positivity rates are dropping dramatically, and the things are really thawing out across the US right now. We're hearing that day by day, and we have a high expectation that we'll be able to make some announcements along that space. And finally, really very, very pleased and proud to have been awarded nearly $30 million under the Medical Research Future Fund. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time a grant of this type has been awarded to anyone in the lung space, or to any corporate grant applicant. In the past, all of these large research grants have always gone to university groups. And to have that funding, of course, the funding will be incredibly useful, but to have that validation of being the first time that the government has trusted a company with this kind of R&D project, really, I think, is a fantastic validation of the quality of our technology and how it competes against any other healthcare technology in the country at the moment. So I'll just get into that grant in a little bit more detail. We're developing 2 generations of scanners, and you can see here in the images, these two images here are actual photos of our concept, or our prototype scanner, which is currently, which we currently have in our Melbourne facility. Those Gen 1 and Gen 2 devices are very much along the same lines. The Generation 1 device is the device that we'll be releasing sooner. It won't quite have all the features of the Gen 2, but it really will be a fantastic instrument. It'll be the first of its kind on the planet. It'll be able to deliver a rapid automated scan in less than 10 seconds that gives a complete scan of your lung health for less than 1 chest X-ray without the injection of any contrast agent whatsoever. The key benefits that all of that offers to allows us to penetrate into the market with our software product across 3 key ways. And they are, number one, that we'll have access to a larger market. For example, the pediatric market will be open to us, allow us to provide children as well as the very old and the very unwell with scans. At the moment, those patient groups are not currently well served by any technology, let alone by XV. So not only are we opening up our technology, helping more people, enlarging our market, but we're opening it to a market sector in which we'll be able to grow much more rapidly than our core market, because there's little to no competition in that space. Additionally, those sites that are looking to increase their unit economics because they have expectations of high volume, the rapid scan time will allow us to do about 3 times more scans per day with the same staff and the same space in a hospital, as I said, dramatically increasing the unit economics. Also, I think that, you know, it's going to be hard to really understand just the magnitude of the impact of the halo effect over this company of delivering that scanner into healthcare. You know, if you think about the technology that's currently out there, there's really only a very small number of scanners in totality: CT, MRI, PET, SPECT. And this will be the fifth column. It'll be the fifth technology and the first dedicated lung technology out there. So I think that's also going to provide a substantial halo effect to the business. We have incredibly strong support from key opinion leaders across the board, and you know, for this project. And you know, we're really looking forward to working with these groups to make sure that we deliver technology that suits them and their members. And as we just finish up here, talk to you quickly about the unit economics. So we have indicative return developed here for the first 10 scanners. If we just concentrate on the XVD, you can see about $6.5 million worth of revenue for placing 10 units, of which we can expect about $1.5 million of profit, but which is really dwarfed by an expectation of about $20+ million. This is in the Australian market. In the US market, it will be substantially higher. You know, we have Australian 150. We expect scans, or our scan price in the United States is $175 US, so it's about $200 US. So you can see here on the more conservative Australian assumption, about $23.8 million or $23.3 million after cost versus $1.5 million in funds after cost. So really what we see is that by placing these units in hospitals, by the fact that we'll be able to penetrate the market more deeply, by having a larger target population that we can also address more rapidly, and have stickier and deeper customer relationships, will really, the whole purpose of this hardware project is to accelerate and drive our software revenue model. So thank you very much. Really very happy to get into some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andreas, for running us through it. We've got a lot of questions, so we'll try to get through them all. First off, can you please explain the difference between sort of the clinical trials and clinical pilots? And with that, does the company target different hospitals for each?
Yeah, look, thanks. That's a great question. And you know, a key part of the difference between those two is, in fact, that we target different hospitals for each. So let me just briefly go back through them. Our clinical trial program is our scientifically controlled program, typically at the very large, exclusive, you know, university teaching hospitals, whereby the technology is put through its paces scientifically, technologically. So, and under those very tightly controlled circumstances. And the end result of that is scientific publications and scientific presentations where the leaders from those hospitals come out and make presentations and explain the capabilities of the technology. Our clinical trial program, our clinical pilot program, however, is where we take the technology and deploy it end to end, not in that scientific way, but in its daily use case. So the doctors get to use the technology the way they use all the rest of it with their patients on a day-to-day basis. And for us, the key end result of that is not someone standing up at a podium or a scientific paper, but simply that we get reference sites, that doctors are willing to stand by the technology, doctors who treat patients day in, day out, stand behind the technology and say, hey, I found this useful, this helped me with my patients. And we think the two of them, with one lot going to those large teaching hospitals and the other going to more regular hospitals, day-to-day hospitals that treat the bulk of patients in the United States, those two together are really the two parallel beams that are the foundation for us building the business over the next few years.
Now, tell us about the pilot with Providence. It's at one of their hospitals, St. Joseph's. What sort of timeline are you working to expect the pilot, to roll out to the rest of the 51 hospitals owned by the group?
Yeah, so look, we are having some delays there at that St. Joseph's site, and as I said, we're talking about a number of hospitals there where there were patients up until recently in the gift shop, set up as emergency treatment capabilities. And, that where in a number of those hospital sites, there were refrigerated trucks in the car park. So we've really, as I said, it's, Australia has had its difficulties with COVID, but it's just difficult to comprehend the scale of that difficulty as it's been there in the United States. However, we are in regular communication with the folks at St. Joe's, and we are, and we expect that we will first roll that pilot out at St. Joe's, commencing reasonably soon. And then from there, we expect it to be about, about 2 to 3 months before we come out with our report from that. The good doctors there will come back to us with a report as to their experiences with the technology. We'll then take that report to the other 50 sites. And I don't imagine that we'll get them all to sign up for pilots right away, but I think we have a pretty good expectation that, we have a good opportunity to get it in front of them. And we think that there's a good chance that some more of them will take it up and we can spread across one to the other to the other.
So that's obviously the pilots with the Providence Group. What sort of timeline are you working to with the hospitals that are clinical trial partners at the moment?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's been a very different effect of COVID on pilots and trial sites, and as I said, things have been sort of slowed down on the pilot side because of COVID. But in some ways, some things, our ability to talk to trial sites hasn't really been affected. So we've been in very good communication with them. And in fact, a number of trials have been added to our list of active trials. But at none of our trial sites across the country have we been able to commence recruiting patients since March of last year. So all of those have been frozen and locked out. However, in the last few weeks, we've had a number of those come back in contact to us and say that thawing of that freeze is imminent, and that we have an expectation that we will have a number of clinical trials active in April. We expect we may even be able to report some clinical trial results as soon as the end of financial year. And we're really very confident with the way things are progressing that by the end of this calendar year, we'll have several clinical trials publicly reporting complete results.
So that's, of course, sort of the trials and the pilots as well. What sort of expectations do you have for the first material revenues from your LVAS products?
So we expect over the course of the rest of this year, this calendar year, for us to make good progress on both those pilot and trial sites. And as I said, for us, that's the foundation that we are building, that we can build our sales process on top of those. And just to be clear, we're looking at having reference sites reporting out saying, look, we used this, it was helpful for our doctors. And similarly, indication by indication evidence. So some evidence, for example, in emphysema, some evidence, for example, in asthma, saying we've specifically used it under these very tightly controlled conditions coming from the big opinion leaders. And those two together are the evidence base that we think we can drive our sales process. So we think we'll have some revenues this calendar year, but we expect that those significant or substantial revenues to be flowing through next calendar year.
Wonderful. And going on for even more timelines, I appreciate you've run us through a lot of them. When are you able to provide a timeline on the XV LVAS expected commercialization? Is that sort of in that next year phase as you were discussing?
Yes, that's right. I think that really is the timeline that I just laid out there. And so I think that for me, as I said, the basic timelines are that we will have some news for everybody, but by the end of this financial year. But really, in terms of laying that foundation, we won't have that really completely laid out until the end of this calendar year. And then in next year, that foundation will deliver us a platform from which we can generate sales, and some really impressive growth is what we expect to see next year.
Now, turning more to the product, originally 4D was, sort of avoiding going down the hardware side. But now with this grant, you will be developing hardware. Can you sort of talk a bit more to that and whether it's due to sort of a resistance around just software alone as a package?
Yeah, look, I think the key for us is that first and foremost, that we are a software company, and that is what we're about, and that's where our revenues will be generated. And that however, rather than thinking of the XVD program as a hardware program, really the key asset that we're generating, and to be clear as well, we're generating that asset from the $30 million of funding delivered to us by the competitive grant process, is intellectual property. It's a technology program. We're developing the technology to allow us to deliver these dedicated scanners, and those dedicated scanners will drive our software business through the three key points that I laid out earlier in my presentation, through widening the opportunity, the software market, and widening it into an area that will have much more rapid growth than the rest, by providing better economics to our customers, which especially those high volume customers, which will make them more sticky and higher volume, and also by the very substantial halo effect that this will provide as we deliver it into the market. So the whole purpose of this hardware program, which is substantially funded, or 50% funded by the federal government to the tune of nearly $30 million, is about driving acceleration, driving growth in our software business. It's the icing on the cake. It's not a new cake, but it's the icing on the one we've always had.
Now, have any hospitals indicated interest in purchasing those XVD scanners?
We actually have already had interest in those, and the level of interest in receiving those as part of this program, the federal government funding will deliver at least 6 of these scanners to sites around Australia and around the world within the first few years. And as we've been talking to potential sites to receive those, we've also had really very strong interest from a number of them to be commercial customers of the technology as well. So the level of interest is really very strong.
And I guess going forward, do you see this scanner becoming sort of a core product for 4DMedical?
No, I think that really what this play for us here is a technology development play. It's an intellectual property play. We're developing that technology, and we strongly believe that having those scanners out there in hospitals will deliver for us, substantially improved opportunities to make sales on our software, which we already feel very good about. And so really how those scanners are delivered to those hospitals isn't really a core focus of our business. I think that having them in those hospitals will add value to us, but how they get there is not important. So, there are plenty of opportunities out there, for example, for us to partner with existing hardware manufacturers to deliver those systems out. And however, having those manufacturers using our intellectual property developed here under this program will really give us, both revenue streams from that manufacturing process, as well as really great control over the product and its placement in the market.
Well, Andreas, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for answering all those questions. I appreciate we sort of covered a lot of ground, but thank you for joining us today.
It is a pleasure. Thank you.